Okay. Oh, there we go. Hey, everyone. We're trying to do this in a way that we can get everyone in from YouTube, in from Instagram. So it's my hope that this is working. This is something new we're trying, and I can actually, I'm not having to balance the phone and all that other stuff. So I'm hoping everyone is able to hear me, see me. I'm just going to check because this is our first time trying this setup. So I'm just going to check in with my team and make sure that everything's working. Um, does it seem to be working? I'm asking them, and we'll see what they say. I'm going to wait for them to respond to me to see if it's working, but hopefully it is, and I'll keep talking while I wait for their response. Otherwise, I'm just sort of talking to myself, which really wouldn't be anything that new. So let's talk about there's a couple of things. Okay, so there's a couple of things I want to kind of get to as in this one, we're going to kind of combine the two things we sort of do. Whoops. Okay, great. I actually have someone watching this. Thank you to you who's watching this. Let me just make this go do not disturb. I thought I did. Okay. I don't know why that dinged. Okay. Anyhow, I am going to go ahead. We're going to do two for the sort of two things at the same time because we're trying this new platform, and that person who actually dinged in there was the person whose idea this was. So I see you. Thank you. Thanks for the great idea. So, and thank you for all of you for sending great ideas and support and all of that. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to take on a little bit from chapter 4. Okay, so those of you on YouTube, we haven't been doing this lives here yet because we're trying to get this all sort of figured out. Those of you on Instagram know I've been doing this. We had a YouTube live earlier today with Med Circle where I got to talk about betrayal and betrayal trauma and all the things related to betrayal, stuff we've talked about recently in a free workshop that's so central to narcissistic relationships. But let's sort of talk about, I want to talk about this idea. It's got sort of multiple parts to it. And I think it's a lot in chapter 4. And I'm going to go a little longer than usual here because a big question that's always floating around there is who's vulnerable to narcissistic relationships? Okay. So there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 parts to this. All right. So who's vulnerable? All right. My argument on that is everybody. Because these are people who are charming, charismatic, confident. They're often successful. They've kind of got the bluster. They sort of put themselves out there. They're those people, right? So we were taught to be attracted to these people. They've got the credentials, they've got the swagger, all of it, right? They're often more attractive. They tend to make more money. They often have this space figured out. The vulnerable narcissists, they're kind of on their own little island by themselves, but by and large, narcissistic people are very good at drawing people. That's why they're such great salespeople, right? So the answer to who's vulnerable? Everyone. Number 2, why are they attracted to us? And I've talked about this in other lives. They're attracted to us because they're trying to they're going to target whom they think is a good source of supply. So you may be a great source of supply for one narcissist, but not necessarily another. Really depends on what they're looking for. And supply for a narcissist, let's use the intimate relationship model first, but ultimately supply is supply. It depends on the nature of the relationship. Supply is attractiveness. It's your status. It's maybe your power in the world, status and power in the world. It may be resources you have. It might be connections you could make. It may be that you help them a lot. It could be that you're a rescuer. You listen to them for hours at a time. You connect them to things. You loan them your car. Whatever it is, you represent supply. And supply is whatever helps them feel more powerful in the world, right? So that's why they're attracted to us. And like I said, your supply may be spot on for one narcissistic person, but not at all. That's why you might say, like, oh, the person's narcissistic. They didn't follow back. We didn't have another date, whatever. It's because whatever your supply wasn't the kind of supply they needed. Doesn't mean it's bad. First of all, nobody should want to be supply because that's a terrible thing to have to be. But we're not trying to be supply. We're just being ourselves, and they figure it out what it is we can bring. Sometimes it's like for a narcissistic person, supply is getting laid. And so if you're just an easy mark that they're just going to have sex with them and that's what they want, then for that moment in time, you're a supply. Okay. Narcissistic people get bored with supply. They're very much novelty seekers, which is why pretty much around the devalue phase is when your supply is getting a little bit stale, or they know it's always going to be there, right? So we all were loving toilet paper at the beginning of the pandemic because we couldn't get it. Now I don't know that you're really that into your toilet paper. It's pretty easy to get. It's kind of that. In the beginning, you're something new and dazzling and interesting and a new sort of supply and you're fresh, a new source of supply and you're fresh, and then it sort of devolves. But here's the bigger question, okay? Because this is really where it matters. Being attracted to them being attracted to us, what gets us stuck? And that's taking us to chapter 4, which is this idea of understanding your backstory, which is really understanding what it is about us, naturally about us, often great things about us that actually get us stuck in one of these relationships. Okay. Because it's not the getting in that's interesting or important. It's the getting stuck, because the getting stuck is where harm happens. Listen, if you have a couple of dates with a narcissistic person, you're not going to get narcissistically abused. There's just not enough time to do that, right? It takes a minute. It takes a minute. You might get some love bomb or love bomb light, or, have to listen to them yammer on about themselves. Maybe you'll get bored. But the issue is the getting stuck. And I think that a lot of people try to frame this conversation of, what are the narcissistic people looking for? Why do people fall for them? We're clear on that. We're all vulnerable. And at some level, everyone's attractive to a narcissist. It just depends on what they're looking for, right? So let's take a look at what gets people stuck. All right. And the things that get people stuck, and I actually have this written down, but I'm just going to go, you're looking at a document, so I want to make sure I get them all. Your empathy. So this best, good, wonderful thing about you, your empathy. Empathy means you give second chances. Empathy means you put up with their stuff. Empathy means you hear their backstory and you feel sorry for them. Empathy means you do feel sorry for them. And so you might stick it out. You might say like, oh, I'm all right. So they were rude one night, or they didn't really listen. That seems like a lot to just walk away from someone, right? Empathy, that capacity to want to understand where someone else is coming from, that's one place you get stuck. Another place you get stuck, and I'm going to take us through the book here. So I'm like literally reading from it, like the good old book it is. It's being a rescuer. Those of you who like to fix things, you're a fixer, and you might have been reinforced for that as a kid. Literally being a rescuer is its own form of trauma response. I'm going to fix things and then I'll be safe. I'm going to fix things and then I'll be okay. But being a rescuer, because narcissistic people can feel like a project, especially the vulnerable narcissists who always feel like sad sack, down on their luck. No one was ever fair to them. And initially, you don't know that they're a vulnerable narcissist. You might actually think that they're down on their luck. You're like, well, let me help. Let me connect you to people. Let me loan you your car. Oh, you want to sleep? Loan my car. You want to sleep on my sofa? That's fine. And that rescuing, like I said, often is sort of a safety response or a trauma response. And it can absolutely get people stuck because you feel uncomfortable leaving. They don't launch, by the way, no matter how much you put into a narcissistic person, especially a vulnerable narcissistic person, they won't launch. They'll keep saying, you're not giving me enough. You're not doing enough. You're not giving me enough time. So they'll always find a way to say, what you're doing for me isn't enough. And meanwhile, they're doing nothing for themselves. Here's an interesting one you didn't know gets you stuck. Optimism. Your optimism, positivity, like there's good in everyone. Everyone has a bright light inside of them. Sure. Okay. But as you spend your time looking for that bright light, that goodness in the narcissistic person, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm sure it's here and there. But as you do that, you stay around longer. Because in the beginning, there's actually a fair amount of bright lights. They might help you out with stuff. They might listen to you. All the love bomby things that make you feel seen and heard and attuned to, right? But then as time goes on, you're going to keep believing like, I'm not going to give up on someone. I don't quit people. I think that's an admirable quality. But that constant sense of positivity, and I'll tell you, that positivity world out there, that brews in the advice-giving world of the internet, it actually ends up shaming a lot of survivors in these relationships who are told like, come on now, there's got to be another way you could view this or turn this around. No, there's not. Absolutely not. There's not. So no. The forgivers, you know who you are. You forgivers, you are narcissists. You don't even supply your chum. They love it. They absolutely love it. They'll keep coming for more. Why? Because for a narcissistic person, forgiveness is a get out of jail free card. And it means to them, they now know that the rules of engagement are, I can do stuff and this person's going to forgive me. And isn't that great? And the first time you don't forgive them, they'll be very quick to tell you, oh my gosh, you're so petty. You're so small. You're so unempathic. And if you're empathic and forgiving, forget it. You're going to get stuck then. Any of you from happy families, that tends not to be a lot of what I see on this channel, but some of you are. People from happy families have their own kind of risk. They actually think the world is just and they think love is fair. And so if you come from a happy family, You might think like, well, you know what? This person had a rough start and I was lucky and I had a good start and I believe in love. And in my family, we just love harder. You could love yourself to death and not yourself, them, but you know what I mean? Love, love, love to death, trying to trying to keep this relationship afloat. The funny thing about the happy family thing is it can get people stuck. And in fact, the family might even enable it. Like, come on, we think they're a cool person. Like, let's just hug them to death and love them and let's make things happen. So families might loan money to a narcissistic partner. They might try to get a business idea of theirs, and the narcissistic partner will drink it all up. And the family will keep giving because that's what they do. And the nice thing, the only good thing, the blessing of the whole happy family thing is that if you come from a happy family and you end up getting into a narcissistic relationship in adulthood, it happens all the time. They're charming and charismatic and all those things you want to sort of date and bring home or introduce to your happy family, is that at least the people in the happy family situation do have a soft place to land. And that's more than a lot of survivors have who end up having to navigate this themselves. Being in a rush can get you stuck. And by a rush, I mean, you might feel like a rush to get married because your friends are getting married, or you might feel a rush because you want to have children. You might feel you're in a rush because there's some other clock that's ticking. I don't know, an impending move or anything like that. But that sense of being in a rush absolutely plays into the narcissistic person's hands, because when you're in a rush, especially when it starts sliding down into the devalue phase, you're going to start missing, like we've talked in other lives, 90-10, 80-20. It's 90% good and 10% bad. Then you're slowly up to 30% good and 70% bad. But as that gradual decline happens, you're kind of in a rush, like let's hurry up and do this. I want to get this done kind of thing, because you feel this artificial clock ticking, or like once I can get this figured out, then we'll sort of deal with these problems. It doesn't work that way. Folks who have had a history of trauma, betrayal, or other losses in their lives, you're another group who's vulnerable to getting stuck. Trauma can really leave us doubting ourselves even more. We might second guess our decisions. We often feel like we just don't even know how to read the world anymore because our trust was betrayed in such a fundamental way. So when that happens, and I would file that also under having been betrayed in other relationships, past relationships, significant loss. You've lost multiple people, and obviously trauma all files under this, but it also impacts decision making. And obviously the ringer is, what about if I'm from a narcissistic relationship? Obviously then you've been so invalidated. You think your needs aren't valid. If you've expressed needs, you were shamed or told you were ridiculous or greedy or selfish or whatever you were told. So then that really means that what happens in a new narcissistic relationship almost feels normal. So what these things do is, like I said, they get us stuck. I don't know that they necessarily get you in, but they get you stuck. And it makes it harder to shovel out. So it's important to know these things about yourself, because this is something that came up in another live I was doing today. And I want to reiterate it here, because the issue that keeps coming up, like, really, they really can't change. And like, is there nothing I can do? Because people, they want to know, like, I can't get out of this. This is my family member, or this is this is a long-term marriage, or we've got kids, or whatever it is. Here's something I want to leave you with. And I want you to, and I'm not going to end it yet, but I want you to sit with this for a minute. The piece that you've got to remember, because we keep getting caught in, they don't change. Well, that feels mean. Their behavior won't change. Well, that feels mean. People don't like radical acceptance. That feels, that feels negative, or that feels so like, I don't like that. Let's put it in this frame. They don't have the capacity for a relationship. Just, that's it. They don't have the capacity. They seem like they have the capacity, right? They can do the things, right? They can show up and they can take you on a date, or they can come out to dinner, or they can talk to you. Feels like it. But they actually don't have the capacity. And they're not going to get the capacity because they don't have what you need inside. The capacity to have a relationship, a successful, healthy relationship, I don't mean a superficial, hollow one, is predicated on self-reflective capacity, self-awareness, empathy, compassion, respect, kindness, presence, attunement. That's what makes for a healthy relationship. And you need that on both sides. One person can't be the only one holding up the tent. All right. So you have to have that on both sides. A narcissistic person doesn't have those things. They're not going to get those things just by definition. These are people who do not have capacity for intimacy and empathy. So when you think of it as a lack of capacity and you're stuck in one of these relationships, You may stop trying in the same way. Like they just can't do it. It would be like asking me, I don't know, to make a souffle. I don't know how the hell to make a souffle. And don't turn to me to make a souffle, because then you're not having a souffle for dinner. Ramani doesn't have the capacity to make a souffle, right? And I'm more likely to be able to make a souffle than a narcissistic person is to be kind or attuned or present. And when you recognize that, and you also recognize some of your own sort of backstory, sort of who you are, what you're about, part of authenticity to understand, like, yeah, I do have a tendency to want to rescue people. I do have a tendency to have like a lot of empathy. Know that about yourself, because that means for you, recognizing what's happening in a narcissistic relationship is really crucial early. It's a bit like having an allergy. That's actually an interesting example. If you had a food allergy, okay, and it can make you very sick, you would be extremely careful to say, what's in this dish? What ingredients are they using? Is this going to be in this environment? You'd be so careful. If you could get anaphylactic shock, or you could get sick, or you could get a rash, you would do your homework. This is the same thing. Having some of these, if you will, vulnerabilities, and I don't love calling them vulnerabilities because I don't think that they're weaknesses. I think they're just parts of who we are, but let's just call them that for a minute. You're you, okay? Understanding that is like understanding what you're allergic to. And it means that if somebody comes along and is always kind of giving you, again, these sad sack stories, or they're like, oh, but you can't leave, my such and such abandoned me, or whatever the heck it is, all the while they're not being empathic to you and all the stuff that they do, and arrogant and all the rest of it. That's like having an allergy. You're going to get more sick. You're going to get more stuck in this case if that happens to you. Another thing that happens in chapter 4, though, are the family roles. I don't want to belabor them in this live, but I mean, I've talked about them on YouTube videos all the time. The golden child, and I'm looking because I used a little bit slightly different language here than I usually do. The golden child, the scapegoat, the helper, the fixer / peacekeeper, the invisible child, the truth seer, right? I recently put out a YouTube video on the fact that it's very rare that a truth seer or a truth teller kid doesn't become a scapegoat, right? And so these roles matter because, in a way, again, it's very easy for us to get sort of pulled into these roles. In fact, some of these roles are why we get stuck in narcissistic relationships. Clearly, the scapegoat takes some of the worst of this. And you may actually not have been a scapegoat in a narcissistic family as a kid and become a scapegoat as an adult, or vice versa. Okay, it really depends. But the truth seers, the truth tellers always see it. They always become scapegoats because the narcissistic person doesn't like being unmasked. They don't want to be seen. It does take us to the question, what happens to the golden child? Do they always become narcissistic? And the answer to that is no. Some of you watching this may have been golden children in your family system. And actually, if you don't have the temperament for narcissism, if you're sort of naturally an agreeable child, if you're sort of a kid who you notice the pain that the parents' behavior was engaging in, but there's actually kind of a danger to not playing along with the golden child dynamic, right? In a way, your being golden childy keeps you in a safe role. All of these roles, folks, the golden child, all of that, part of them are safety response. I think the scapegoat role is the one that's not a safety response role. It's something happening to that child. So even if the scapegoated child is trying to be a fixer or a rescuer or a peacekeeper, they get shut down. Whatever stimulus the scapegoat child or scapegoat adult child is in a system, you can't really subvert it no matter how hard you try, which is why the scapegoated kids and scapegoated adult kids, you can really create a lot of sort of psychological tension and harm, right? But the golden child doesn't always become narcissistic. Sometimes the golden child actually carries a lot of guilt and shame. And an interesting pattern is that some golden children feel like, okay, everything was given to me. Tuition was paid. I got the car. I get to say everything. I get to do anything I want. I got the air conditioner in my room in the summertime. I got to go on the special vacation with dad when he went to play golf with his friends, whatever it may be. And if that golden child doesn't hit it out of the park, you can start to see them getting kind of like, oh gosh, well, I guess really if everything was invested in me and I couldn't make it work. But the golden child's on a pedestal. And you never want to be on a pedestal around a narcissistic person, because every pedestal that a narcissistic person puts us on is on really unstable ground. So if you were a pedestalized golden child and you're watching this, you're probably not narcissistic, and you might identify with some of that shame. You might also identify with the idea that the day you stopped being the perfect golden child, doing what they wanted, looking the way they wanted, showing up the way they wanted, bringing them more supply through praise and all that, the day that stopped, you started being taken off that pedestal. And if you're a golden child who ever spoke out against the parent, you might have actually become a scapegoat. But of all those roles, the role that's most likely to become narcissistic is the golden child. And many a golden child goes on to become a full-blown narcissistic, adult, because they've been told they're more special than all the other kids. I mean, if any of you had golden child siblings, you saw it. Your golden child sibling was literally told, maybe even out loud, you're better than them. Don't spend time with them. You are better than them. And it's a horrible, triangulated, terrible thing to do to a child who is confused and scared, but might still also, again, that safety, that attachment response, feel like that they have to sort of throw themselves in there with the narcissistic parent, win them over. And sometimes the golden child can get mixed with that fixer role, where the golden child might say, like, I just got to keep doing this thing that they want me to do and succeeding at it, even though I don't want to do it, because as long as I do it, they stop going after my sibling. So even the golden child, which sometimes feels like a straightforward role, can get quite complex. Now, these roles don't define us. It doesn't mean that if you're highly empathic, you're always going to be in toxic relationships. It means that you have to take that part of you, which is honestly gorgeous. And I always say that survivorship is pulling out those healthy parts, not throwing it all away, not becoming so cut off saying, well, everyone's going to be mean to me, so I'm not going to be empathic to anybody. It's not that. It's holding on to those gorgeous empathic parts, but also recognizing that because you have that, there is a greater probability that if you're in the purview of a toxic person, you're going to get hurt. It also means sitting on your hands. If you're a rescuer or a fixer type, you know what? When you go to someone's house and especially if you helped cook or brought stuff, don't do the dishes. I know you're like, what? But literally sit on your hands. You've done all the other stuff. They invited you to dinner, but every so often, shutting off those rescue-y, fixy responses, it will feel funny. It might even feel panicky, but every so often break out of role. You can do it. You don't always have to be the peacekeeper, but it's hard. Fixer, rescuer roles are often, they very much are felt and processed as sort of trauma responses. I'll be safe if I keep managing the conflict. As someone who's a peacekeeper naturally myself, I was always the person who was sort of sitting at the top of the stairs, making sure everything was okay as a kid. And I think I do the psychological equivalent of sitting at the top of the stairs in any room I'm in. And so many times that's why the only way I can come down is to be alone, because then I'm not having to monitor the room for that and play the peacekeeper. In this chapter where we're talking about roles, we're talking about vulnerabilities, walking through how these things might have kept us safe, how they might still show up in our lives, and how to sort of find the best part of it and recognize, like, yeah, no, if I'm in a room and I sense tension, it throws me off. So I got to pick my rooms better, or sometimes leave the room. Or come down at those other times. So that's that. And I want to toss one last piece in here before we wrap up this live. I'm going to talk a last little bit about perfectionism, because that came up in a question I had gotten. And it's sort of it's a two-sided street, right? And it plays a lot into these roles. The one thing we're taught is if we could be perfect enough, if we could be absolutely perfect, then this narcissistic relationship could work. That's the belief, right? As a kid, if I was perfect, and perfect for a narcissist is you can read their mind. You can anticipate what they want, right? That's what perfect is. And that's not possible. I mean, even the infant baby wants that from a mother and a parent or a caregiver, and they can't give it. So it's a two-sided street, because the narcissistic person wants to believe they're perfect, needs to be perfect, right? Attempts to create this life of perfection and will rage at anyone who sort of suggests otherwise. They project that anticipation of perfection on people near them. Whether you're the child of a narcissistic parent, or you work for a narcissistic boss, or you're in a narcissistic relationship, you actually try to do perfect. Read their mind, look the way they want, not express a need, be a completely needless, inert thing that sits there and almost like you don't even need food, nothing. And you sit there and that's perfect to them, that you do not ever need anything unless they need it at the same time. And what that does to people is it makes it seem like this is your fault, right? It's not you of it all. I wasn't perfect enough. I wasn't good enough. I just did this to myself today. I had a series of terrible things happen to me today. It was a whole narcissistic situation. And I bless my team and thank my team because they got me through it. And so did my shrink. And so did two other people I talked to. But I was sobbing. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? I thought I did everything. I tried to be perfect. And finally, someone broke and said, there's nothing you could have done. Right. They were not, that was it. And it was that, listen, it's still happening to me, is what my point is. But I tried to be absolutely perfect. Every single email sent the right way, blah, 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 blah. Still didn't work out. Okay. This idea of perfectionism haunts us like a ghost for all of our days, because when we get one thing wrong, we attack ourselves. The old saying goes, perfect is the enemy of good. I would really say that that is on steroids when we're talking about narcissistic relationships, because it sets into our mind that perfect is possible, and it's not. And we associate perfect with getting love. In a way, trying to be perfect becomes a safety response, becomes a trauma response. And that means that our response, the way we try to get love, it's literally impossible. And that's what these relationships are. So folks, I was struggling with it as recently as 2:30 today. So when I tell you it's real, it's real. So read this book. This is I said it today, this is a guidebook through the gates of hell. And this will help you figure out where the restrooms are on that road to hell and all the way straight through. This is meant to get you through to the other side and feel sane and stop blaming yourself. I was doing it today because I couldn't be perfect enough. I know all of us are struggling with this. So please hold that. Remember, perfect is the enemy of good. All of you are good. All of you are great. List those beautiful parts of you that save, that rescue, that help. Find worthy recipients to offer that to. Keep being empathic. Keep helping out. Keep being good to even forgiving to people who deserve it. Because when you do that, those absolutely gorgeous parts of yourself are part of a system that works. But please stop wasting it on the narcissistic folks who feel entitled to it. So bless you all. I'll see you tomorrow. I think this worked. My team will tell me, and maybe we got to speak to all of you, and we'll be doing these more and more and more all week as the book rolls out. Get it if you haven't. Oops, there you go. Get it if you haven't. And I look forward to talking to you more tomorrow. We're talking some chapter 5, radical acceptance. So talk soon. Have a great beginning of your weekend. I know it's a long weekend for a lot of folks, so enjoy it. And I really look forward, and I'm telling my team that I'm about to sign off, so they're at the ready. About to sign off. They can hear me. About to sign off. And again, I hope you get to do something fun. It's always nice. A Friday of a long weekend feels like so much possibility, at least so much sleep. So go do whatever you need to do for you, but don't do it for the narcissist. Thank you. Bye.